Hi, and welcome to my channel, I guess. I thought I would make a video just talking about my thoughts and experiences with Wheel of Time because, there aren't enough people making videos talking about Wheel of Time. That's sarcasm, by the way. But yeah, what is the internet for if not to give my unsolicited opinion about whatever I want to give my unsolicited opinion about? So here I am. I actually recently realized that I have been lying to people about Wheel of Time for a long time. It was unintentional. I think I, passed the oath rod test. But yeah, I have been lying about Wheel of Time. I have told people for a very long time that the Wheel of Time books were the first fantasy books that I ever read. And that is blatantly not true. The first fantasy books I ever read are probably the same first fantasy books that a lot of people my age ever read. The Narnia Chronicles. I read those as a kid, starting from grade, I think, 2 or 3, and read them over and over and over and over and over and over again. I loved those books. I know there's a lot of hate for them out there. I still love them. And maybe I'll talk about those in another video someday. But for now, let me just say, those were the first fantasy books I ever read. And the first other world that I ever got absorbed in. The second fantasy book, or books, depending on how you talk about them, that I ever read was Lord of the Rings. I had to read it for a university course that I was taking. My roommates both had read Lord of the Rings, and both were very excited that I was going to be reading it. I was not excited. So I started Lord of the Rings, and it was very hard for me. I remember complaining to my roommates, like, how do you like these books? It's describing, like, every bloody leaf on every tree, and it's... But they were right. I pushed through it. It went from my being annoyed at every description of a leaf to worrying that I was going to miss a description of a leaf. When I got to the end of Lord of the Rings, I asked my roommate for a recommendation for another fantasy book. I remember being very specific about that. I did not want a book series. I wanted a book, because I had really enjoyed Lord of the Rings, but I didn't know if I liked fantasy. And so I wanted just a standalone book that I could read that she could recommend to me. And I could sort of dip my toe into fantasy and see if I liked it. Well, she told me that actually all of the fantasy that she had read had been recommended to her by her boyfriend. So she asked her boyfriend for a fantasy book for me to try out. And the next time he came over to our place, he brought Eye of the World. Now, to be fair to him, he did not realize that it was a book series. He thought it was a standalone book because he hadn't finished it. He gave it to me as I didn't like this book. You wanted a fantasy book? Here. I was going to throw it away. Here. But I trusted that it was a standalone book, and I read it, and I must have enjoyed it. I honestly don't really remember much about my first impressions reading it. I do remember noting the similarities between it and Tolkien, not in a negative way. I remember thinking, oh, I like this take on sort of the Tolkien narrative. I like, what it has to say about storytelling and that sort of thing. But because I had specifically asked for a standalone book, I assumed that it was a standalone book. I am going to just go on a limb and say that if you are watching this video, chances are you read and know Wheel of Time. And you know how Eye of the World ends. And so you can imagine how confused I was when I got to the end of that book. It's a satisfying end, but it does not feel like the end of the story. And so I got to the end and was like, well, that's weird. Okay. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know, well, it was just a very weird way to end the story. And, well, some of the keen observers among you might have noted that I am animated. And the reason for that is that, well, this all happened in the 90s. I'm an old lady, and I don't want my old lady face on YouTube. That's just the long and short of it. So, we did not have internet at our house. There was no just Google it. That book ended weird. Let me Google it and see. There was no Google. I don't even think there was a Yahoo at this point, but even if there was, we didn't have internet at my house. Looking things up on the internet would have entailed driving to my university, going to the computer lab, using my university computer lab credits to log on, and then probably Netscape, maybe? I don't even think Netscape was around at the time. Even if there was that, it wasn't just a regular go-to of, I'm confused about this, let me look it up on the internet. That just wasn't a thing that people did. So, I just thought that was how the book ended, and the story ended, and I put the book down and didn't think about it for months. And then I was in a bookstore a few months later and happened to walk by the fantasy section and saw a cover. The art style reminded me of Eye of the World, and I picked it up and thought, I wonder if this is by the same author. It didn't even occur to me that it would be a sequel. And I picked it up, and it was The Great Hunt. It was the next book in the series. And I freaked out, and I think that maybe there were 4 or 5 books out at that time, but I picked them all up, bought them immediately, and went home and, inhaled them over the next maybe week and a half. My roommate, she still will joke about the time that I put one of the books down, I think to get a drink from the kitchen or something, and looked up and commented, "Oh my God, the storm! What happened? The storm is gone! That storm ended really quickly." And she looked at me and was like, "What are you talking about? What storm?" And I stared at her for a few seconds until I remembered, oh, that was in the book. The storm was happening in the book. That wasn't real. Right. Okay, I'm crazy. So, anyway, that's how I began with Eye of the World. That's how I began with The Wheel of Time. Since then, of course, I've finished the series, and like many people of my age and ilk, I suppose, whenever a new book would come out in the series, I would start it again and read through it again. And then, of course, there were those years where you had to wait many years in between books, and I would just start them again and read them. I don't even know how many times I've read the series. I know for the latter books, maybe only 4 or 5 times each. But the rest of the books, I mean, it probably would be embarrassing if I could actually go back and count it. But I love them. I love The Wheel of Time. Going back to it feels like going back to somewhere that I spent a wonderful time in, and I get to go back. And the glorious thing about it is that it always feels great. It's not like going back to a place that you went on vacation when you were 10, and when you go back again, it's like, oh, it's not as good as I remember. It's not like that. It's always as good as I remember. There are parts of it that are even better than I remember, when you know about the foreshadowing, and you know what's coming, and you know how satisfying it's going to be, or you know how terrifying that's going to be. It's wonderful. It's such an immersive and beautiful world, and the characters, they're nuanced and exciting, and they grow and they change, and they are impacted by what happens to them. It's wonderful. I love Wheel of Time to the point that it has been a bit of a problem for me in my reading life. I don't read a lot of fantasy, and part of the reason for that is that when I pick up another fantasy book, I find that I'm just disappointed that it's not Wheel of Time. I try to get absorbed into it, and Only the Harry Potter books have been able to absorb me in the way that Wheel of Time and Lord of the Rings and Narnia has. I don't know why, but I have problems with fantasy specifically just because of how wonderful Wheel of Time is to me. So that's basically what I wanted to make my first video about. Just my love of this great series, and so that's it. That's this video. That's what I wanted to talk about. And I think you're supposed to end these videos by saying, like, subscribe, and all that. So, do that if you like. I'm pretty new, so I don't know how this is going to go. But that's it. Hope you had a good time, and hopefully you'll come back. Anyway, bye!